I read 9 books in May, and if you stick around, I'll tell you all about them. Hello readers. I am using a Snapchat filter today. I think when you notice that in my videos, then you should be aware that I'm probably struggling to do basic things like put on makeup and get ready and get super happy to be in a video. If you're already subscribed to this channel, then you know, with the exception of a couple of videos, live shows actually, that I did for book club reasons, I haven't really uploaded any videos. Talking about books has just felt really trivial, and I haven't been able to muster up the energy or the desire to want to do that. But I do want to say definitively that Black Lives Matter, and while I don't have the answer for how to dismantle systemic racism, I am taking the time to further educate myself. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Ahmaud Arbery. These are the names of people that recently lost their lives due to police brutality and at the hands of racism, and we can't allow this to keep happening. In the description box below, I will provide links for where we can sign petitions, where we can donate, and where we can continue to support anti-racist efforts and the Black Lives Matter movement. In the month of May, I've read 9 books, the first one being Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Back in 2003, MTV came out with a Wuthering Heights movie, which is only a small part of the actual book, and I fell in love with that movie at the time. There was like music in there, the guy that played Heath was a musician, and it was just like this love triangle. It was very passionate. I thought it was awesome for its time. And I remember watching it and thinking, I really want to read this book now. But I tried looking for it, and the way it was written, I couldn't get through it. Like, I couldn't even understand what was being said in the first paragraph. So for me, it was really challenging. I eventually put it down, but that movie and my desire to read the story kind of stuck with me. For 2020, I actually created a bunch of reading challenges, and one of the challenges that I made for myself was to read 4 classics this year, and so I ended up nominating Wuthering Heights as part of my book club because I figured, well, if I can read it with a bunch of people, we can discuss it, maybe I'll get through it. Also, my son read it in high school, and he wouldn't stop talking about how juicy it was, so I figured, let me just finally read Wuthering Heights. So I did read it with the Libri Labra book club, and I will be sure to link to our discussion in the description below. So what did I learn? I learned that the MTV movie completely lied to me, and that this was not a love story. It's not, I mean, maybe it's a love story, but it's not a romance. I gave it 3 stars. The characters were completely unlikable, like all of them. I know that sometimes stories have unlikable characters, and that's perfectly fine, but when it's that many of them, like it was hard to get through. Now, I understand it's a classic. I feel like maybe at some point in the future, I might be willing to read it again now that I know it's not anything like what I expected it to be. But yeah. I'm not even sure how well I would do if I tried to provide a synopsis, but let's just say a lot of dysfunctional people got together and did very spiteful things to each other, and then Heathcliff was like haunted by Catherine, and like the remaining people were just in a lot of pain. I don't know, man. It was a hot mess. The second book I read was In 5 Years by Rebecca Searle, and this was a love story. It was a love story, but it's, again, not a romance. I got this book from NetGalley, but by the time I finished reading it, the audiobook was available, so I read the ebook and listened to the audiobook at the same time. In 5 years, Danny Cohen has a seemingly perfect life, and one night she goes to bed and she has a dream, and in her dream, she wakes up next to a man who is a stranger to her. She has a ring on her finger. She's in an apartment that she doesn't recognize, and, you know, after she has that dream, she has trouble forgetting it. She doesn't understand why she had that dream or who that person was or what that apartment was. And so you go through the whole book finding out if that dream ever comes to fruition. I thought it was well written and it was interesting, and you are going through the book trying to find out, what does this dream mean? So it was a bit of a page turner. In the end, I was just a little bit disappointed because I walked into it thinking it was a romance, but I did give it 4 stars on Goodreads. The next book I read was Ghost Squad by Claribel A. Ortega, and this was an arc that was provided to me by Scholastic. It is a middle grade supernatural fantasy. I was also a little bit late on reading this, so I ended up listening to the audiobook. The audiobook narrator was Almarie Guerra, and she also narrated a few other Latinx books like Don't Date Rosa Santos, Labyrinth Lost, 5 Midnights, and a few others. This book was described as having the family dynamic of Coco with the adventure of Ghostbusters. The story follows Lucely Luna, who works with her dad doing ghost tours in St. Augustine. It includes Dominican folklore where spirits kind of inhabit the bodies of cocuyos, which are something like fireflies. And so Lucely has a jar of fireflies where she's able to still see her deceased and speak to her deceased relatives. There are nostalgic pop culture references in here, which I think makes this a great story for middle grade and for adults. In this story, Lucely and her friend Sid accidentally cast a spell that awakens malicious spirits, and so they need to team up with Sid's grandmother, who is a witch, and her familiar Chunk in order to save the day and save the family business and save Lucely's relative spirits. I really enjoyed this, and there's something to be said when Latinx authors authentically include their culture in the stories. Even though I'm not Dominican, I still felt a lot of it. It's just like you walk into it and it makes your heart swell, and it makes me feel like I'm part of a family because so much of it felt familiar to me. From the cleaning to their eating to the lullaby that was in it. That was a lullaby that my tias used to sing to me when I was growing up, so that actually brought tears to my eyes. It was wonderful to read. The family dynamic was great. The adventure was fun. I think I may reread this sometime in October, but overall I really enjoyed it and I give it 4 stars on Goodreads. The next book I read was The Confidence Code by Katie Kay and Claire Shipman. This was a nonfiction book that compares and contrasts the different ways that confidence can present itself in men and women. The tagline is, "The Science and Art of Self-Assurance, What Women Should Know." One of the things that I thought was really fascinating was the fact that apparently confidence is in our genes, and some of us are born more confident than others, while some of us are born more prone to anxiety and insecurity. A fairly shocking statistic that I came across while I was reading was that when there's a majority of men, women speak 75% less. I actually read this with my work book club, and I think overall the takeaway was to think less, take action, and be authentic. I found the book to be fascinating, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. The next book I read was Dark Dawn by Kristoff. This is the 3rd book in the Nevernight Chronicles. If you haven't read Nevernight, it is an adult fantasy that follows a bi-teenager, Mia Corvair, on her journey to get revenge for the murder of her family. I was not ready for this series to end. I loved being in this world. I loved the characters, the environment. I did cry quite a few times while reading this. This was a Libri Labra book pick, so I will leave a link in the description if you want to check out our discussion. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. The next book I read was The Betrothed by Kira Cass, and this was the BookTube Chicks book club pick. This is a YA royalty story that is the first book in a duology, and unfortunately it does not have the interesting bits or the bingeability of the selection. There was a love triangle, however the king was a misogynist, and so he wasn't very appealing, and she developed feelings for a commoner, but he was kind of boring and wasn't appealing either. I would say that the worst part of talking about this book is admitting that I'm likely going to buy the second book in a duology because the ending was like the most interesting part of this story. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. The next book I read is a manga, Junji Ito's Cat Diary, Yon and Moo, and this was recommended to me by patron, book club VIP member, and friend Tom Brennan. This follows a man who doesn't have too much experience with cats. He just has stereotypes and fears, and his wife brings home these two cats, so he gets to know them, and at first he can't stand the fact that she's brought them to live with them, but you know, then you get to see how his heart slowly melts and what happens. Cat lovers will absolutely enjoy this, but I don't think you have to be a cat lover to appreciate the story. This is written by Junji Ito, who is a horror mangaka, so this is a departure from what he normally draws and writes. It is a short manga, so it is a quick read, good for readathons, but I really enjoyed it and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. This is an adult horror novel. This is the first Grady Hendrix book I've ever read. It takes place in the same South Carolina town as My Best Friend's Exorcism. I do want to provide some content warnings for this book, so please be aware that there is rape and pedophilia and suicide and adultery and probably a bunch more stuff. So if you find those kinds of things triggering or anything else triggering, I suggest you do additional research before jumping into this book. As you can see, I did purchase the hardcover, but I also purchased the audiobook, which is narrated by Bonnie Turpin. So this book is about a group of women in a true crime book club. You get to see a lot of pieces of their lives. It's very domestic in that respect, but while they're in this book club, they're getting to know each other, and you know, a stranger kind of sweeps into town and they start noticing that he's doing some weird stuff, and the main character, Patricia, starts to get like really curious about him. It's important to note that this is not your Edward Cullen, Damon Salvatore kind of vampire story, but I did find this to be unputdownable, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The last book I read is The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek, which is a nonfiction self-help leadership book. I borrowed this book from the library. I listened to the audiobook, and that was how I processed it. I listened to it via audiobook. So I'm hoping to at some point either pick up my own copy or read a physical copy to process it even better. But in this book, he's talking about finite games like chess or football or something that has, you know, a set of rules and an outcome that will come from applying or playing that game. And then he talks about the infinite game, which is about always doing more, doing better, growing. It's just a different set of rules, it's a different outlook, but he provides examples of each and how playing the infinite game is always better. The audiobook is passionately read by Simon Sinek, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Well, that's what I read in May. I know it's coming in a little bit late, but please let me know in the comments below what your favorite book for May was. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and don't forget to hit the bell to be notified when I upload new videos. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.